I didn't look at my brother when he said it. I kept my eyes on the mediator's notepad, on the thin blue lines running across the page, and I breathed. She hasn't contributed a single dollar to this family in 11 years, my brother said. Not to Mum's care, not to the property taxes, not to anything, and now she wants half. I counted the lines on the notepad. 12, 13, 14. His name is Curtis. He's 4 years older than me, and growing up, I thought he hung the moon. He was the one who taught me to skate on the pond behind our parents' place in Muskoka. He was the one who drove me to my university orientation when Dad's truck broke down on the 400. For a long time, I thought that version of him was the real one. I was wrong. The mediator's name was Mr. Olabunmi, and he had the kind of face that gave nothing away. He looked at me across the table and asked if I had anything to add. I said, not yet. My mother had died in February, ovarian cancer, diagnosed the previous March, gone 11 months later. She was 67. She had a farmhouse in Muskoka and a small RRSP and a life insurance policy she'd been paying into since my father died in 2017. She also had 2 children, Curtis, who had stayed in the province and built a landscaping company and a life that looked from the outside like responsibility, and me, Simone, who had left at 22 and not come back in any permanent way since. That was the version of events Curtis had been telling everyone for years. And it was true, in the way that a photograph of one corner of a room is true. It shows you something real. It just doesn't show you the rest of the room. The life insurance policy was for $340,000. The farmhouse had been appraised at $580,000. Mum had left everything split equally between us, with one condition: that both parties sign within 60 days of the estate being settled, or the matter would go to a court-appointed arbitrator. Curtis had refused to sign on day 59. His reason, delivered through his lawyer in a 3-paragraph letter, was that I had been receiving informal financial support from my mother for years. Support that, in his view, constituted an advance on my inheritance, and that this imbalance should be corrected before any assets were divided. He was claiming $87,000. He said Mum had told him. He said there were records. There were no records, because it never happened. What had happened was the opposite, but I hadn't told anyone that, and I wasn't sure, sitting in that mediation room in the law office on King Street West, whether I was going to. I had left Muskoka at 22 because I didn't know how to stay. That sounds vague, I know. What I mean is that I had a degree in biochemistry from Queen's and an offer from a research institute in Ottawa that felt, at the time, like a door I had to walk through or spend the rest of my life wondering about. So I walked through it, and then the door led to another door, and that one to another. And somewhere along the way, I stopped being Simone from Muskoka and became something else. Something I couldn't explain at the dinner table when I came home for Christmas. Something my brother called too good for us now when he'd had 2 steam whistles and forgot to be polite about it. I wasn't too good for them. I was just somewhere they couldn't follow, and I didn't know how to build a bridge back. Mum knew, though. Mum always knew. She called me every Sunday without fail, right up until the last few weeks, when the morphine made conversation hard. She never asked me to explain my life. She never made me feel like leaving was a wound I'd inflicted. She just asked how I was sleeping and whether I was eating enough, and sometimes she'd describe what was happening in the garden as if she were painting it for me in real time. She called the lilacs her purple riot. She said that every spring, after Dad died, I started transferring money to her account every month. Not because she asked. She never would have asked. I did it because I did the math one afternoon and realized that between the property taxes on the Muskoka place, the upkeep, the fuel oil for winter, and the OHIP supplementary coverage for her prescriptions, she was spending close to $4,000 a month on a fixed income of just over $2,000. I set up an automatic transfer, $2,500 a month. I told her it was a loan because I knew she'd refuse a gift. She accepted it. She called it our arrangement. She never told Curtis. For 9 years, I sent that money. Some months it was more, when the furnace needed replacing, when the roof had to be patched after the ice storm in 2021, when the vet bills came in for the dog she refused to put down until he told her it was time. I never kept a formal record. I didn't think I'd need one. I thought my brother knew me well enough that I'd never need one. The mediation session lasted 2 hours. Curtis spent most of it not looking at me. His lawyer, a compact man named Mr. Firth, who kept clicking and unclicking his pen, laid out the claim methodically. Mum had told Curtis that she helped me out from time to time. Mum had mentioned, he said, that I was finding my footing in Ottawa. Mum had implied, he said, that I was the one who needed support. I sat there and listened to this version of my mother and tried not to let my face show what I was feeling, because I understood, suddenly, what had happened. Mum hadn't lied to Curtis, she'd just never corrected him. She'd let him believe what he wanted to believe. Maybe to protect his pride. Maybe because she knew how he'd react to the truth. Maybe because she was tired of managing the space between us. She'd kept our arrangement between us, and now she was gone and there was no one left to speak for what had actually happened. Except me and the bank. Mr. Olabumi called a brief recess. I stepped into the hallway and called my financial advisor who had been on standby. Then I called the bank. By the time we sat back down, my phone had 3 documents in it. 9 years of transfers, itemized. A letter from my bank confirming the originating account and the regularity of the transfers. And a message from the property management company Mum had used for the Muskoka place, confirming that the 2021 roof repair had been paid for by a third-party e-transfer from an account registered to me. I hadn't wanted to do this quietly. Quiet felt like shame, like something to hide. I slid my phone across the table to Mr. Olabunmi. If we're going to talk about who supported whom, I said, I'd like to start here. The room got very still. Curtis's lawyer leaned over to look at the screen. He looked for a long time. He clicked his pen once and set it down. Curtis looked at me for the first time that day. He looked like a man who has just reached for something in a familiar drawer and found it empty. He started. 9 years, I said. $2,500 a month minimum, plus the roof, plus the furnace in 2019, plus the vet twice. I never asked for a receipt because she was my mother and I didn't think I was going to need one. He said nothing. She didn't tell you? I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. I know she didn't. That was Mum. She didn't want you to feel bad that you couldn't do more. She was protecting you. She was always protecting you. The thing I hadn't expected, the thing that blindsided me completely, was that it would hurt to say that. I thought I'd feel righteous. I thought I'd feel something clean and sharp, like finally being heard, but what I actually felt, sitting there with my phone on the table and 11 years of distance between us and my mother, 4 months gone, was grief. Just grief. Enormous and shapeless. I had to look at the blue lines on the notepad again. 12. 13. Curtis put his elbows on the table and pressed his hands over his face. His lawyer said something quiet to him that I couldn't hear. Mr. Olabunmi asked for another 10 minutes. The documents were enough, more than enough. The legal case Mr. First had been building evaporated in approximately the time it takes to scroll through a bank statement. There was no $87,000 advance. There was no informal support flowing toward me. If anything, if anyone wanted to make a counterargument, which I chose not to, the math ran very much the other way. Mr. Firth withdrew the claim before the recess was over. The estate settled 3 weeks later. The split was equal, as Mum had wanted. Curtis and I signed on the same afternoon in the same room in the presence of the same notary public, and we did not speak. I drove back to my apartment on a Tuesday. It was late March, still gray, one of those Toronto afternoons where the sky and the pavement are exactly the same color, and the whole city looks like it's been printed in one shade of nothing. I parked underground and sat in the car for a while. I thought about Mum calling the lilacs her purple riot. I thought about how she had never, not once in 9 years, said thank you. Not because she wasn't grateful, but because she knew that I didn't need her to say it. She knew the way only she ever really knew me. And I'd taken for granted that her knowing me would be enough to protect me after she was gone. It wasn't. It almost wasn't. There is a version of the story where I walked into that mediation room with nothing but my word, and Curtis's lawyer dismantled it in 20 minutes. And I walked out, having lost both the inheritance and whatever was left of my relationship with my brother, over a lie neither of them knew was a lie. I think about that version a lot. I think about how close it was. I keep the bank records now. Every transfer logged in a folder on my desktop labeled simply Muskoka. I don't know why I keep it. She's gone. The house has been listed. Curtis and I have exchanged 4 text messages in the past 2 months, all of them logistical, none of them warm, but I keep it because it's proof that I was there in my own way. That I showed up in the only way I knew how. That even from 5 hours away, even from inside a life no one in my family fully understood, I never stopped being her daughter. She knew that. I know she knew. I don't need the folder to tell me so. But I keep it anyway, the way you keep certain things. Not because you need them, but because getting rid of them would feel like letting go of something that was never really yours to release. The lilacs will come back this spring. They always do. I won't be there to see them. But I know they will. She told me, every year, as if it were a kind of promise. I think about the blue lines on that notepad a lot. 12, 13, 14. It's strange, the things you hold on to when you're trying not to come apart in front of someone who used to know you. What happened in that room on King Street West was not, in the end, about money. It was about something quieter and harder to name. The way a person can do right by someone for years and leave no trace that the outside world can see. I sent those transfers every month for 9 years and told no one. Not because I was hiding anything, but because it simply didn't occur to me that I'd ever have to prove it. That's the part I keep turning over. Not the accusation itself, but the assumption underneath it that because I had left, because I had built a life that looked nothing like what my family expected, I must have taken more than I gave. I didn't fight back in that room because I was angry. Though I was. I fought back because I had the truth and the patience to let it speak plainly. Those two things together. Knowing what's right and being willing to wait for the right moment to say it clearly. That's what actually held me together when it mattered. Not bravado, not volume, just the quiet steadiness of someone who has done the honest thing for a long time and can prove it. Curtis didn't set out to lie. I've made my peace with that, or I'm trying to. He built a version of our family in his head, where he was the one who stayed and I was the one who abandoned ship. And our mother, being our mother, never wanted to disrupt that story. She protected him the way she always had. What she didn't anticipate, I think, is that protecting him would eventually cost me something real. She couldn't have known. I don't hold it against her. But I've learned something from all of it about what it actually means to show up for people. Showing up isn't always visible. It doesn't always look like presents at the dinner table or a truck in the driveway. Sometimes it's an automatic transfer at the end of the month and a Sunday phone call and knowing, without being asked, that the furnace is going to need replacing before February. That kind of showing up takes a particular kind of integrity. Not the kind that needs an audience, but the kind that just keeps going anyway, year after year, whether or not anyone is watching or counting or remembering. And it takes something else too, the willingness to keep a clear head when everything gets painful and public, and accusations are flying across a conference table. Not to dissolve. Not to match the other person's version of events with a louder version of your own. To simply open the folder and let the numbers do what numbers do. I'm not a person who cries easily. I didn't cry in that mediation room. I cried in the car afterward, in the underground parking garage, alone, for about 10 minutes. Then, I drove home. The lilacs will come back this spring. I won't see them, but I know they will, and somehow that's enough to keep going.